I had certain plans then, such as you do when you're young, when you don't realize how limited time is, when you don't realize there's a shell built around you, a hard shell so you can't get out. That line has haunted me ever since I read Kazuo Ishiguro's The Unconsoled. It's raw, it's desperate, and it perfectly captures the vibe of the whole book. Well, this isn't a book review, it's more like a hyperfixation fueled info dump. I want to talk about how language in The Unconsoled produces alienation and powerlessness. And when I say alienation, I mean a separation from identity, goals, and environment. I want to talk about how Ishiguro distorts language into something that can break down human bonds. There are going to be a few spoilers here. I'm going to talk about specific moments in the book, and I'm going to try and give enough context so that you can follow along, even if you haven't read it. So, first, a plot summary. In terms of plot, it's pretty simple. Our seemingly amnesic protagonist, Ryder, arrives in an unnamed European city for a piano recital at the end of the week. When he arrives at the hotel, he cannot remember what his schedule is like, although he's told by nearly every character he meets that he's very busy. He pretends to know what's happening as he's pulled from appointment to appointment, from one end of the city to another. Let me give you an example of how this novel is more surreal than it sounds. At the beginning of the novel, Ryder is in a hotel elevator with the porter, Gustav, and they speak at length. By this point, Ryder has already thought how confused he is about his schedule, and how he doesn't know what to do. The conversation with Gustav seems like 5 or 10 minutes, like at least, but it's somehow constrained to half an elevator ride. At this point, he suddenly realized that a woman named Hilda Stratman is in the elevator with him, and she's in charge of his schedule. No sooner had I said this, I noticed that the porter was gazing past my shoulder at some spot behind me. Turning, I saw with a start that we were not alone in the elevator. A small young woman in a neat business suit was standing pressed into the corner behind me. Perceiving that I had at last noticed her, she smiled and took a step forward. Now, this is clearly absurd and ridiculous, and it's indicative of how little Ryder is aware of his own environment, which becomes a pervasive feeling in the novel, and it's the first concrete example of his alienation. And it speaks to the modern condition that Ishiguro is writing about. It makes you wonder if it's even possible to understand or be aware of the forces all around us. But this obliviousness is just the start. Ryder is unable to articulate his lived experience throughout the novel, and it begins in the elevator. The only thing the reader is certain of at this point is that Ryder has no idea what his schedule is. But when Stratman suggests he's seen it, he just agrees. Of course, you've had a chance by now to familiarize yourself with your schedule. There was something about the way she uttered this last remark that made it difficult for me to respond, entirely frankly. I thus muttered, "Yes, of course." Here we see a schedule, the symbol typically of control and organization, get distorted into something ethereal and threatening. As the novel progresses, we develop the feeling that somebody could come up to Ryder at any point and tell him he's about to miss the most important moment of his trip if he just doesn't get across town right now. So we can see that Ryder has an unusually vague understanding of his environment, and that control of his time and space is withheld from him intentionally. Now, this lack of control represents one more complete part of Ryder's alienation. But his is also a psychological alienation. He often tries to assert some semblance of control by going over events that have just happened to him in his head, but he's unable to. I tried to recall how that afternoon had ended, but I found my mind wandering instead to another afternoon altogether. Ryder's psychological space then is controlled by the same unknown force as his exterior life. He seems only able to remember what this force wants him to remember. This evokes the quotation that I opened this video with, spoken by the hotel manager Hoffman. Unlike Ryder, he's noticed and described the constrictive nature of the unconsoled world, but he doesn't have any idea how to fix it. And it should be noted, too, that Hoffman can only describe it using vague language like a hard shell. Nobody has the tools to describe the fundamental workings of this world, and that's what Ishiguro is writing about, lacking the tools to understand your world. So, how do characters exert control over their own worlds here, then? One way is by using this doublespeak, where what they say means literally the opposite of what they mean. They speak around things. Take, for example, the scene where Hoffman wants Ryder to come down to the lobby even though Ryder's trying to sleep in his hotel room. Hoffman basically guilts Ryder into coming downstairs. Mr. Ryder, it's no bother at all. In fact, I'll be honored to wait here for you. So as I say, come entirely in your own time. I assure you, I will remain standing here until you arrive. I felt more tired than ever, but there seemed little option other than to go down to the lobby. Besides being, hilariously catty, this is the most effective way that characters control Ryder and the rest of their world. Stratman uses this doublespeak when she suggests that Ryder's seen his schedule. By saying, "You've seen this," she implicitly admits that she's registered Ryder's confusion about the schedule. She knows he hasn't seen or doesn't understand the schedule. But by pretending she doesn't, she's able to force Ryder into agreeing with her. Since Ryder never really accomplishes anything, including any of their side quests, I'd argue this is a pretty bad strategy. But Ryder has other difficulties with language too, and they go beyond just implications. Whenever he tries to break away from this doublespeak, which seriously contributes to his alienation, he becomes cut off from language itself. For example, a pair of journalists derail Ryder into coming up to a monument in town and taking pictures for them. It's just one of a whole slew of distractions, but Ryder's pissed off about this one. The journalists have dragged him away from his wife and stepson. But at the moment he's about to reproach them for taking him on such an overblown long journey, he finds that he can't speak. Ryder clearly knows that language should be a means to connect, but in the novel it becomes a wall that he simply can't break through. Do you realize? I caught myself muttering through clenched teeth in time to my steps. Do you realize? Somehow the sentence never got any further, but with each step, either in my head or under my breath, I repeated this line over and over until the words themselves began to fuel my irritation. Even based on this interaction and nothing else, I think you could say that Ishiguro is suggesting to address alienation at all is a luxury of agency. This radical presentation of powerlessness is one where the afflicted is unable to even think about the powerlessness constructively. They're just too busy trying to survive. In the end, Ryder gets so beaten down by this constant side questing and all these disorienting interactions that as he's leaving on a train after the recital, never having given his performance, he thinks to himself that he's done a good job. Whatever disappointments this city had brought, there was no doubting that my presence had been greatly appreciated, just as it had been everywhere else I had ever gone. Of course, this is the exact opposite of what's happened. He never plays at the recital, and yet the townspeople speak of his visit as triumphant. Ryder distorts his own past trying to come to terms with his experience by using the very linguistic systems that disorient him. The Unconsoled shows us a world where the systems controlling us are so subtle that we don't even have the language to describe them. In a world where articulating our experiences is becoming more difficult, Ishiguro asks the question, can we ever truly understand the forces governing our lives? Thanks for watching. I had a lot of fun making this, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I'll see you again soon.